Galatea is an interactive fiction-based game that lacks the visual design and graphical interface that many modern games possess. However, Galatea shifts the definition of a traditional video game by having unrestricted options and over 70 different outcomes. This game forces users to type out what they want to say instead of choosing from a list of actions, allowing every user to have his or her own unique narrative and interactive experience.
If one word could be used to describe the user's first interaction with the Galatea, it would be underwhelming. The user is greeted with a plain white web page, a standard body of text, and the title, Galatea, at the top with a contrasting black background. As far as the graphical visual elements are concerned, that is all Galatea has to offer. Galatea is a text-based interactive fiction that avoids grand cinematics, set pieces, and AAA titles such as Call of Duty or Uncharted. The creator of Galatea, Emily Short, is known for creating interactive fictions without visual aids that would cause users to stray away from the desired focal point, the story. Because of this, the user interface and aesthetic design is kept to a bare minimum. Short explains that Galatea does not have an ending symbolic of winning or losing, and users will find that even after several of the 70-plus endings the game has to offer, the only change is the text on the screen. Galatea also doesn't offer any instructions on what to do with the game or what to be looking for in terms of responses and questions to ask the AI. This lack of visual stimulation coupled with zero guidance can create an initial experience that is not only boring but frustrating. The types of blockbuster video games that are currently being released have created a certain standard to which graphical interface and user instruction are to be expected. For example, if one picks up any modern FPS, almost all of the controls for moving, shooting, etc. are similar or can be found on the instructions menu of the game. Galatea does not include any of this, leaving some users feeling lost in a foreign sea of text. However, what Galatea lacks in visual appearance and instruction, it makes up for in its unique narrative and player interactivity. While the design mechanisms of Galatea may be minimal, the aesthetics of the medium through which it is presented, coupled with the narrative the user crafts, creates an experience that is as mentally intriguing as it is visually bland.
Galatea is loosely based off the Greek myth of Pygmalion, who falls in love with his own sculpture that Aphrodite brings to life. However, it is unclear whether Galatea is an actual representation of a myth or an AI. For example, the reset command freezes Galatea and gives the user a list of 7 possible outcomes she can perform. Galatea pays extensive attention to the original myth, going so far as to reference the story by Ovid of Pygmalion of Cyprus, the artist who carved the statue of Galatea, and alluding to her mythological history.
In some storylines, the statue seems to hold a grudge against Aphrodite, and a resentment of the goddess can be brought forward, having Aphrodite take back the life she granted the statue. While in other endings, Galatea will admit loving her artist, alluding to the original myth where Aphrodite brings the statue to life so she can be his bride. The game is titled Galatea due to its continual references to the myth, and because the AI's intelligence is largely based off a compilation of stories of the myth Galatea. Whether Galatea is an AI or a sculpture brought to life, almost every narrative will raise the question, how can this statue feel emotions and generate equivalent responses of a living being? In some storylines, Galatea will tell the user of her passage and mistreatment here, making the user question whether or not she is classified as a piece of art or a person. Just by hearing her story, the user also sees the pain and the beauty of life through her anecdotes of Pygmalion. This discussion of emotion coming from an AI makes the game more compelling.
While the interactivity in Galatea allows players to have greater control of the story, players cannot do everything immediately. For example, Galatea begins the story as cold and distant, but through conversation, the player can befriend her or even take her place on the pedestal. Though Galatea limits users in what can be said, the game is unique in that it gives users a wider range of possibilities to craft the storyline, allowing users to explore both the breadth of their own creativity and the intricateness of the game by asking varied questions, giving the game replayability.
Putting users in charge of the conversation gives them power over the plotline, making the story malleable, bending with the user's thoughts. For example, after having a conversation with Galatea and progressing through the plot, if the user asks about something irrelevant, such as cheese, Galatea won't be able to continue the previous conversation. This shows that if conversation gets out of hand, the progress in the previous plot is erased, and a new plotline begins, just like in real-life conversation.
Zimmerman explains that games have an explicit rule system. They have a definite result or outcome, but this is not the case with Galatea. In a sense, Galatea does have rules, but the game is more open compared to other games, even ones that give the users choices in the narration. Nothing in this game is set, and no ending is definite. The only rule of the game is to keep the statue engaged in a conversation until an ending, good or bad, is reached. Galatea forces users to logically navigate through and interact with Galatea. When the user types help, the game says, "This is an exercise in NPC interactivity. There is no puzzle and no set solution, but a number of different outcomes." Hence the feature of this game having 70 plus endings. Most traditional video games have a linear storyline. There is either the ending in which the user has achieved the win state, or the user has failed and is given the fail state and or try again. It is completely up to the user to define what is considered winning or losing. What makes a storyline more complex is its dependency on Galatea's and the user's emotions. If you tell Galatea that she's an AI exhibit too early in the game, she may turn cold and ask you to leave. If you are aggressive towards her, she may just harm you. The game's endings are presented as an actual conversation between two individuals with emotions. An article in the journal Cognition and Emotion, Volume 25, explains the intersection between narrative fiction and emotions. When emotions are evoked during reading, they are likely to have an immediate influence on the reading process. The simplest outcome may be a cessation of reading, if the emotions evoked are not what desired. The authors convey that reading evokes either a pleasurable or undesirable emotion, such as frustration. If readers experience a pleasurable emotion while reading, they are more likely to continue reading. Conversely, if they experience an undesirable emotion, they may just stop reading altogether.
Defining what is success and failure might seem difficult at first. Montfort explains that many interactive fiction works have a goal that is explicitly presented or that becomes clear during interaction. In terms of Galatea, users define what success and failure is as they progress throughout the game. Thus, if users are enjoying the game or having success, ultimately meaning progress to some sort of ending instead of going through an endless conversation loop, and talking to Galatea, they will continue to progress throughout the plot. Alternatively, users may become frustrated with the fact that there is no predefined rule system. If users continuously fail to gain minimal progression in the conversation, they may become agitated and type leave, instantly ending the game.
That is what the beauty of having multiple endings is. There is no measure to define what the better ending is. Every user has a different experience. There is an extremely small probability that duplicate playthroughs exist, unless a walkthrough is being used. There is no real goal other than to achieve one of the endings. The ending one receives is vastly different from the other, thus giving each user a unique experience.
While Galatea may seem bland, the white background and use of text is used as a tool to display the various stories involving the user and the AI. At first, users may be bored or frustrated when playing the game, but when they finally get to one of the 70 endings, they realize just how invested in the game they actually were. The ending is completely dependent on the questions the user asks and Galatea's responses, which allows for a multitude of unexpected endings. This idea of multiple endings and user control gives every user an experience unique to them.